I am a dentist, but I don't care very much about teeth. Teeth are how I pay the bills, but what I love is the sky. I like to consider myself an amateur astronomer, because whenever I don't have bills to pay and mouths to clean, I set up camp on a little hill not too far outside of town, and I place down my telescope and I look up at the sky. There have been a couple of times that I've seen things that I couldn't fully explain, and this is gonna be one of those times. It was a warm summer night, and I was honestly looking forward to it all day, to the point that I almost injected someone with an anesthetic in the wrong spot, which would have been bad. I did not do that, for the record. The clouds had parted, and it was all perfect. I'd been taking turns looking at a different system every day I went out, and today was the day that I was going to look at the Zeus system, the fourth farthest system from our own. In this system was a planet called Jupiter, a gorgeous planet with 96 moons to study. It was all set to be an amazing night. I'd brought snacks, some beers, and I was ready to just bask in the beauty of the universe. It was amazing, and while I don't exactly study astronomy to the point that I could completely understand it all, I understood it well enough to identify almost anything I saw. I started with Jupiter, which took me around an hour to really feel satisfied with, and then I moved on through its moons one by one. I was around halfway through, looking at a moon called Zircon, when I first noticed it. There was a small shimmering coming off of the moon, in the direction of Jupiter. It trickled down towards it at an astonishing speed. I wanted to adjust my telescope's focus so I could make out some more detail, but it moved so quickly that I was afraid that I would lose track of it and never be able to find it again. I watched it descend all the way down until it was lost in the fog of Jupiter's gas and it was gone. I sat back, astonished. I'd never heard of anything like this. It was almost as if it was a tiny star, but I was able to see it in front of Jupiter, which meant that it would have had to be a star nearer than the Zeus system, or even a second much smaller star within it, even smaller than Jupiter itself, and that was impossible. After around 5 minutes of simply scrambling through my own thoughts to try and recall if I'd ever heard of a phenomena like this, and I kept coming to the conclusion that there was nothing I'd ever read about that could explain it. It was, of course, possible that this was some phenomena that had already been thoroughly documented that I'd simply missed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that anything this fascinating would have been something I'd already have had some obsession with learning about. I got an electrified feeling in my heart that told me I'd just encountered something no man had ever documented before. Finally, I took the effort to focus my telescope and retrained it on Zircon to try and see if I could catch it again. And I did. There were even more shimmers, even though they were much smaller than the previous one. It seemed as though the one that I'd caught before had simply been a stroke of luck caused by an anomaly amongst a series of anomalies. My heart pounded in my chest. Little lights descending from Zircon all the way to Jupiter. At first, I thought I was witnessing some gravitational anomaly. Perhaps the collapse of an entire moon slowly being absorbed into its host planet, with the lights being some byproduct I didn't understand. But soon I realized that that couldn't have been what I was seeing. That's because when I fidgeted with the telescope, accidentally shifting my gaze just a little bit upwards, I saw another stream of little lights heading the other way. I mean, I saw these little lights moving from Jupiter to Zircon. I wasn't seeing anything natural, that was for sure. I believe that what I saw was something like a physical supply chain, a society from space harvesting materials from Jupiter and bringing them back to their home on Zircon.
With the proximity of their sun, it was totally possible that the planet was capable of hosting life, as long as they were able to somehow shield themselves during certain parts of their orbit. I'm sure there are other explanations for this, but I can't imagine that any of them don't necessarily involve the existence of alien life. The reason I never reported this discovery is because I was afraid of the possibilities. It's possible that the world would learn about the existence of aliens and then we would all celebrate together and maybe we'd all go out to Zircon and shake hands with the Zirconians and make friends like all across the universe, but that's just one possibility. Another possibility is that the government already knew about the Zirconians and that they were ready to silence anyone who tried to report on this discovery. And I wasn't ready to put my life on the line for this. I was just a dentist after all. It's also possible that the people of Earth would travel out of the Gaia system one day and confront this species. Maybe we'd kill them all and maybe they'd kill us. I don't trust humans not to pick fights, and I didn't want to be the one to cause a tragedy. I thought maybe it'd be nice if we could all stay at home, admiring each other from the distance and keep the wars to ourselves. Of course, now I am telling you because I don't think that's a possibility anymore. Mankind is preparing to go to the moon. A confrontation is inevitable. I want the people of Earth to know so that we can prevent conflict before it starts, and we can prevent our government from getting away with anything without us knowing. My other story took place on a fairly familiar kind of night. I was looking forward to studying the skies all day, nearly getting distracted during a root canal, and I found myself a nice spot on that hill again. And ever since then, I'd chosen intentionally not to look in that direction, so I could avoid any awkward encounters like the ones I listed at the end of my last story. The big difference with this day was that it was cloudy. Not so cloudy that it was a death sentence to the whole evening, but cloudy enough that I had to stop using the telescope for 15 minutes at a time because the view would get blocked. On that day, my goal was to look out as far as I could. That meant looking through the Hades system, into the spots where I could see past Pluto and catch glimpses of the end of the universe. The end of the universe is usually one of my favorite parts about stargazing. I love the feeling of looking out and suddenly realizing that there's nothing to see. It's like remembering life before you were born. There's something peaceful about that. That's what I was expecting to experience, to be able to clear my head a little, but instead I did see something. It looked like a cluster of gases. I saw purples and pinks swirling around pure black, like in two mirrored arcs feeding into each other into the shape of an eye. The black was real, not the end of the universe and not just space. It felt tangible somehow. Like if I was there, I could touch it. This is another thing I'd never heard of before in my life. I'd never seen anything like this in space before, and frankly, I never want to again. It gave me this sinking feeling in my gut, worse than any steep drop on a roller coaster that I've ever felt before. But as I kept looking, I started to realize that maybe this wasn't just my emotions toying with me. I felt drawn into this eye, like I couldn't look away, and slowly I felt the world around me starting to shift. It felt like the land was turning to liquid, and that there was nothing solid to stand on. I still couldn't look away, but it felt like pretty soon I'd be sinking into the earth. It felt like the ground beneath my feet was slipping away from me, and soon I'd be falling through space and time without anything to grab onto ever again. Thankfully, a cloud crossed in front of my view before I had a chance to find out what really would have happened. I'm sure none of my fears would have come true, and the thing I was seeing was just having some kind of bizarre hallucinatory effect on my brain, but What in the hell could have caused something like that? In space? I was completely baffled, more so than when I saw the zirconian material harvesting chain. That I could have imagined, but this feeling and this sight, it was unlike anything I'd ever heard of or seen before. Anything. When there was finally a small gap in the clouds that I could look through again, I had to fight the urge to put my eye to the telescope and study the eye again. And I lost that fight. I looked through the lens, and I saw the eye. Almost instantly, I was transported back to that feeling of being lost in space, my feet completely losing all the ground beneath them. It was kind of like floating, but with this sense of dread and a mental fog that made me forget whether it was night or morning, whether I was 9 years old or 90. And then it blinked. I mean, the arcs collapsed in on themselves only to open back up again. But these pink and purple clouds, shaped the way they are, it was unmistakable. They looked like eyelids, closing and opening. I distinctly felt that I was not the only one watching at that moment, but that this eye was watching me right back. The clouds covered my view again, and I collapsed to the floor, shivering all over. I curled up into the fetal position and whimpered to myself. And I cried, more than I had in years. About everything. I cried about my life, and how much I hated being a dentist, and I hated having to hide on this hill just to do what I loved, when there were people out there who got to look up at the stars every day of their lives for a living. I hated the town I lived in, so small that it had absolutely nothing going for it, and with people so boring that it was impossible to hold a conversation. And eventually I fell asleep. That was my last day as a dentist. I moved away from True Town and I found a home across the country. And I worked as a dentist for a while, but I went back to school and studied astronomy, and now, even though the teeth still pay my bills, I get to do what I love surrounded by people that support me. I've tried looking up at the sky to try and make eye contact again, but I've never seen it since that day. I've tried mentioning it, but I only got strange looks from people in return. So, whatever I saw that day, and whatever saw me, I think we might be the only ones who really know what's really there at the end of the universe. I've been trying to uncover the truth about my town for nearly a quarter of my life now. It started when I was in middle school, when I saw something like a ghost in my school's theater. But then, I was in high school. I'd made some progress in some areas, like with uncovering a cult in my town that worshipped a man called the mayor, but for the most part, I was still as lost as ever. Maybe I was even more lost than most people who lived in True, because at least I really understood that things were not normal there. Like, not even a little bit. This is a story about the time that I really realized that this town was not just strange, but completely different from anywhere else on Earth, and maybe even dangerous. I was wandering out in the fields. If you really want to know why, it's because I'd heard about some rumors that there was a whistling sound that you could catch coming from the forest if you stood in certain areas. But this didn't go anywhere at the time, so honestly I was just wasting my time out there. But then suddenly, I was blinded. Like, seriously blind. There was a sudden blast of light coming from the sky and the sound of a groan coming from way above me. I didn't even have time to try and look up to see where any of this was coming from before the thing that was creating it had already descended. I think it's most accurate to call this thing a spaceship, but I'm not a rocket scientist, so maybe there's another more technical term for it. Big machine, flies up into the sky, carries people in it, one of those. Except this thing that shot light out of its butt like it swallowed a flashlight was shaped like a man's head. It looked like if it was a whole lot smaller, it'd belong in some kind of archaeological exhibit in a museum. The mouth of this head opened, or I should probably say that a hatch shaped like a mouth opened and someone stepped out. It looked like a human, specifically a little boy around 10 years old. Bear with me here. I'm shocked out of my mind, like so crazy scared and baffled that I feel like I might have just been surprised right back into clarity. There's a lot of stupid things that I could have done in that moment, but my first instinct was to just straight up ask the kid who he was. So I did. I'm a spaceman, the boy said, as he ran back into his ship to grab some kind of device from the back. I asked the kid what his name was. In retrospect, I definitely wish I asked him a little more about the spaceship, but I'm just glad I didn't shit myself. He told me his name was Ricky, and then he came out of the ship with a dial with a long, sharp metal rod sticking out of the bottom of it. I asked him what it was for, and he just said, measuring. Then I asked him why he was here. Have you ever noticed anything strange about this town? He asked as he walked forward and stuck the dial into the dirt and left to go back into the ship. I almost screamed out of excitement simply because someone else had apparently noticed. I started rambling about the mayor and the ghosts and the countless stories of missing people, but I realized that it might have been a rhetorical question when he came out of the ship holding a homemade pretzel. He offered me one, but I turned it down. I came here because I got some readings telling me that there was an anomaly below the earth here. I just came to conduct some measurements, he said, through a mouth of half-chewed pretzel. He walked up to the dial and looked down at it. Then he immediately spat out the pretzel and picked up the dial and ran back up the ramp into his ship. What's wrong? What did you find? I shouted after him. Something I shouldn't have, he responded. I would stop trying to research this town if I were you. Matter of fact, just move out. For real. And whatever you do, do not try to dig here. I felt chills run down my spine. What is it? What's underneath the surface of True Town? I asked him. Nothing, Ricky said. According to my readings, at least, there's nothing at all. And then, the mouth closed back up, let out a groan, and the ship lifted back off into space. I re-experienced this whole encounter in my dreams all the time. There were so many other questions I wish I had asked him. Was he human? What did he detect that made him come here? And most of all, nothing? How could there be nothing?